Well, welcome to Mamba. Welcome to Monday. And what we'll do on a Monday is we'll talk about stories, specifically South African stories, which you may have missed in terms of the media. Um, the likes of Daily Maverick and News 24, and probably, well, wherever you get your news from, even ENCA, tend to lean very to the left, and they're really government sort of spokes people. So we try and steer clear of those as much as we can. So I look for stories that perhaps haven't been covered. So I have got three for you today, and what we're going to do is we'll start off with this. A high-profile judge-led inquiry has actually begun, and what they're looking at is the 1985 abduction and killing of the Cradock Four, with President Ramaphosa mandating a national review of apartheid-era atrocities. A typical Ramaphosa. We haven't even put Babita Doctrine's people behind bars, but he wants to go back to 1985. However, from a centre-right point of view, we generally support uncovering the truth and ensuring accountability. But we also stress that the contemporary governance and challenges shouldn't be overshadowed by historical reckonings. Okay. I mean, the concern is that a heavy focus on memorialization of the past might divert political and even fiscal attention from urgent policy reforms and economic renewal. So we're always on about this economic renewal, and this has come to the fore. What is the Cradock for, and why is it important? Well, as I said, we go all the way back to 1985, and the Cradock Four, pardon me, refers to four anti-apartheid activists, Matthew Goniwe, I'm sure it was Matthews, Ford Kalata, Sparrow Mkonto, and Sitlile Muhlauli. And they were abducted, they were tortured, and they were also then just murdered by apartheid-era security forces in 1985. They were active members of the United Democratic Front and grassroots organisers in the Eastern Cape, particularly in Cradock. Obviously, that's why the Cradock Four, where they mobilised communities against apartheid oppression. So their burnt and mutilated bodies were found days after their disappearance, typical apartheid kind of stuff, sparking national and even international outrage. So even despite the Truth and Reconciliation Commission later identifying security officials as responsible for this, no one's ever been prosecuted. And now Squirrel has decided that a new 24-25 inquiry, which he's mandated, must seek to uncover why justice has been delayed for nearly 4 decades and whether political interference actually prevented any earlier prosecutions. Again, I say, it's all good and well. You want to go back to 1985? That's some 50 years ago, Squirrel. Let's try and get today's cases sorted out. So I wanted to pick that up and just discuss that with you and share a bit. And then we've got this US PEPFAR that is cutting their funds and what it does in terms of our HIV. So and basically the announcement of significant cuts to the US-funded PEPFAR program, leaving about 7.6 billion as a gap in terms of funding for HIV, has shaken up South Africa's HIV and AIDS efforts, particularly for the vulnerable groups who rely on subsidized care. Now, commentators argue that while the government bears the responsibility, this crisis also highlights an over-reliance on domestic systems. Again, we need Big Brother. It's not true. We don't have a money problem. We have a corruption problem. They've called now for sustainable funding models, public-private partnerships, and accountability to ensure health service isn't compromised going forward in the future. But ANC and all your mouthpieces, you have blown it. And Trump has said, bye-bye and sorry for you. Now, what more can I tell you about PEPFAR? Well, it's the US, it stands for US President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It's a global initiative. It was launched in 2003 to combat HIV and AIDS, particularly in the sub-Saharan African sort of space. It's provided billions in funding and technical support and antiretroviral treatment, making South Africa its largest beneficiary. Again, duh, okay. For over 2 decades, PEPFAR has played a central role in supporting HIV testing, treatment, and prevention programs and clinics serving vulnerable communities, including, in fact, sex workers and at youth risk. This recent decision by the US to cut back PEPFAR support due to concerns over governance and alleged misuse of funds, is critical because South Africa's public health system lacks the financial and operational capacity to fill this massive 7.6 billion gap. So, without rapid intervention or alternative funding, millions are going to face reduced access to life-saving treatment, risking a backslide in the country's hard-won progress against the HIV epidemic. So we leave it with the Lord, and we pray that something comes up. But again, the ANC, they are South Africa's own worst enemy. The last thing I want to look at today are the national flood disaster that's been declared in the Eastern Cape. And we also look at, could it have been sort of circumnavigated or perhaps restricted a little bit more. But let's get into the story so I can tell you what it's about. Devastating floods have killed at least 92 people and displaced thousands in the Eastern Cape. The government has actually declared a national state of disaster. Conservative critiques point out to long-term standing failures in the infrastructure and slow response times as symptomatic of the weak governance in the Eastern Cape. They argue that such disasters demand robust investment in preventative infrastructure. Hello, why haven't you been doing that? Especially in rural regions, alongside transparent and efficient allocation of relief funds, lest the country remain trapped in reactive crisis management, which is exactly where we are. Okay, so while natural weather events like heavy rainfall can't be prevented, the devastating impact of the recent floods in the Eastern Cape, where over 90 people have died, could have been significantly mitigated through proper planning, infrastructure maintenance, and early warning systems. Guess what, my peeps? Years of neglect in stormwater drainage, poorly maintained roads, and unregulated systems have now led to this. Our informal settlements that are unregulated in the flood-prone areas have made communities especially vulnerable. A proactive government response, such as enforcing land use regulations, investing in flood defenses, and improving disaster preparedness, could have reduced the loss of life and property. The catastrophe reflects not just the climate volatility, but the ongoing failure of municipal and provincial authorities to prioritize risk management over a reactive crisis control. We thank the ANC. That's it for this week, guys. Take care. God bless. I will chat to you next Monday, and hopefully some more news that you haven't heard. Take care. God bless. Remember, use the brain that God gave you.